very excited to have Tony Silvia. He's apparently very reverend. Father Anthony Silvia is an experienced nonprofit administrator, a lover of the esoteric and the arcane, and has been successful in growing the Johannite church wherever he has been. He's a Martinist, a Freemason, member of the Friary / Order of the Sacred Flame, and has studied esoteric orders and their works for many years. He's also the author of The Sanctuary of the Sacred Flame, a guide to Johannite practice, the director of the Gnostic Wisdom Network, which produces the popular Gnostic video and audio podcast Top Gnosis, which he also produces and is co-host on. So his topic today will be Gnostic Visionary Ascent, Anti-Astrology, and the Beginning of Gnosis. And take it away, Father.
Thank you very much. As a wise scholar once told me, you can't have an accurate presentation unless you have a good subtitle. So I would like to begin this by giving a little background for why I find this topic so fascinating. The Secret Book of John is my favorite of the Gnostic scriptures. It is dense and confusing and weird and great. So it has drawn me from the beginning. And one thing that I noticed upon repeat readings, because you notice absolutely nothing on your first reading of the Secret Book of John, you just sit there with your jaw hanging open and you go, what? But on repeat readings, patterns emerge that are useful and interesting and exciting. One of them is that there is an implication of a ritual life of the community that used this document. For expediency, I'm going to call them Sethians. They maybe didn't use that term for themselves. There were maybe several different groups that used the same or similar documents that would have even argued with each other over important points of doctrine. However, in deference to all of the great scholarly work going on in this field, and many people who reject labels of Sethian or even reject the label of Gnosticism itself, let's take that as read. I'm still going to use the terms. I think we all know what I mean when I say it. The Secret Book of John, in particular, as I mentioned, kind of hints at a ritual life of the community that used this text. In particular, what I believe was some sort of visionary ascent ritual. The need for it, in the milieu of the ancient world in which it existed, they would have been certainly no stranger to ritual ascent practices. Greek mysteries are full of things like that. And this tradition, I think, draws heavily on those sources. Anti-astrology, because in this and in other texts, specifically the Pistis Sophia, there's a number of mentions of fate being the direct enemy of the Gnostics. That by being a Gnostic, you have ejected yourself from the wheel of fate, and you are now accepted from all of that stuff that all of the regular folks are subject to. More about that later. Anyway, I have to figure out how to do this. Okay, this is kind of the overview. And maybe I have to go back. Where am I in this? Okay, here we go. I don't know how to use this. At any rate, so what is Gnosticism? Very briefly, I believe Gnosticism is a family of religious traditions. I'm going to go through this very quickly because we all know. A family of religious traditions that emphasizes the Gnosis as a prerequisite for salvation and actively works towards its realization. So, yeah, right? We're all kind of on the same page about this. All right. The Sethian Gnostics in particular, through this document, we can find out a lot of what they believe, how they felt about fate, the planets, the elements, the body, sex, salvation, and what to do about all of it. So we'll cover a little of all of that as we go. The Sethians were a Gnostic sect, or a family perhaps of Gnostic sects in the Roman era. It was one of the main currents of Gnosticism, one of the largest traditions, at least from the textual evidence that we have available. Arguably pre-Christian Judaic tradition that was later Christianized, especially this particular text seems to be very obviously in that category. It's strongly influenced by Platonism. There are five or six texts we'll talk about in a minute that are heavily Platonized Sethian texts. Shout out to what's the German scholar's name we had on the show years ago who was working on Platonizing Sethian?
Are you thinking Dylan?
Dylan Burns, yes,
Yeah.
who's done some excellent work on this thing. So we'll also talk about all those folks in a minute. All right, here are the Sethian corpus that we know of. These are the books here. This one is the one I'm going to be using, and these are the other Platonizing Sethian Gnostic texts. So these are all of a family. They all share some important characteristics, and if you were to take these books as a group and combine them, you would have a pretty solid group of theological texts that you could draw from and draw a fairly consistent worldview out of. Secret Book of John, likely written by a pre-Christian Platonized apocalyptic Jewish baptizing cults. Try saying that 5 times fast. It's very obviously, to me anyway, Christianized at a later date. The whole text is completely devoid of Christ, except for the framing story at the beginning and the end, where John, after the death of Jesus, gets accosted and trolled by this dude named Nicodemus, who says, your Savior's dead, ha ha, and then John goes on to be sad, and then Jesus comes and says, don't be sad, let me tell you all the things. So that happens at the beginning, and then a little bit tacked on at the end, and then a few mentions of Christ sprinkled throughout, like in particular there's a figure called Autogenes in the cosmology, who is referred to as Autogenes, known as Christ, parenthetically throughout the document. So it seems to me fairly obvious that this was a pre-Christian text that was later Christian. We have 4 physical copies of the Nag Hammadi library available, of the Secret Book of John available, all fragmentary to some extent or another. There's a short version and a long version. We have 2 copies of each. 2 short versions, one in the Berlin Codex and one in Nag Hammadi Library Codex 3. 2 long versions, one in Nag Hammadi Codex 2 and Codex 4. There's the main differences between the short and the long version is the long version contains longer lists of angels or demons of the various parts of the body, which were likely used in magical healing practices or something to that effect, and a few other bits that are left out. All right, and we begin. We talk about the monad. The monad is referred to in the text as these epithets, as some of the early important figures are being mentioned. I will just kind of pull these out. So when you're reading the text, this is one of the reasons why the text is confusing, because it uses all of these terms interchangeably throughout and does not explain. So if you were reading the text literally, you would say, okay, so I'm talking about the Father of all, but then in the next paragraph we're talking about the invisible Spirit. Is that the same thing? And it is, for the most part. We cannot talk directly about the monad, so we have to talk around it. This is one of kind of the hallmarks of Gnostic texts, is that we have apophatic theology. If anybody has that on your bingo card, you can please check it off now, which is the describing of the Godhead in negative terms. God is not this, God is not that, God is something like this. Via analogy, or whatever that is in the Latin or whatever it's written in. Cataphatic theology, which is the opposite, which is like this is God is like this, God is like that. And then via emanations. I don't know what the fancy phrase would be for that, but this is describing God as a totality through the emanations, which we will talk quite a bit about in a moment. The first figure to appear in the pleroma. The pleroma is Greek meaning fullness. It is the divine realm, the totality. The first figure that we see is Barbelo, also known by all of these epithets. Barbelo is largely considered to be a female figure. And quick aside, my intent for this presentation was to to specifically pull out the female figures from the Secret Book of John, but I did not do that. So this is a repeat presentation, but I will pay special attention and highlight the female figures from the Secret Book of John and talk about why they are specifically important in these cases. Barbelo is, again, tends to be referred to as a female figure. However, you'll see a lot of her epithets include triple male, the mother father. Mother father is one of the more common. So it could be accurately described Barbelo as a kind of androgyne figure, perhaps, although most often considered female. I just thought Barbelo was smiling and happy. She had a good time up there. She as the first emanation of the divine. Barbelo then asked permission from the invisible spirit, the first father, to emanate beings to assist her and to hang out with her. She was lonely, I suppose. So by asking and gaining permission from the invisible father, she emanates these beings, and it becomes the androgynous pentad, because each of these beings are both male and female, as I mentioned. With Barbelo, the androgynous pentad, or the decad of the aeons of the Father, referred to in the text. I want to pay particular attention, I think it's in the next slide, but there is throughout this part of the text, this emanation of the divine beings, there's a pattern that is followed. Permission is sought, permission is given, emanation occurs. So pay particular attention to that. It is, if you know the trope of Chekhov's gun, it will go off later in the third act. Autogenes Christ is then emanated. Again, permission is sought, permission is granted. Autogenes is emanated. Some of his epithets. And then these fellow workers are in turn emanated. So they're kind of the reason why. So the fellow workers, mind, will, and word are those fellow workers. The three, will, thought, and life, and the four powers: grace, perception, understanding, prudence. The reason why this gets confusing is because powers is kind of a term of art in Gnosticism. If you've read Paul, powers and principalities. In Gnosticism, powers tend to be a negative word, but it is used in a positive connotation in this sense, and that could be due to transcription over the years or what have you. But anyway, the fellow workers, the three and the four, then get emanated.
Why does will appear twice there? Is that two separate words? It's
two separate wills. Again, okay, so let me.
Is it the same word though? Do you know?
In the original, I don't know.
Okay.
I do want to point out, and when I gave this presentation in St. Sarah's a few years ago, they said, "Thank you so much for making the Secret Book of John so simple for me." It's not. I'm not doing that. I'm sorry if you get that impression. I am rounding over a lot of hard edges here to make this, presentation worthy. Please read the text for yourself at least 45 times. You'll thank me later. All right. The next are the four great lights. They get emanated out. The four great lights are important in the Sethian cosmology because they are kind of the direct actors. You might consider these to be analogous to the four archangels in our system. There's not a direct one-to-one correlation, of course, but an argument could be made. So we have Harmosiel, whose assistants are grace, truth, and form. Oriel, perception, paranoia, and memory. Devithe, understanding, love, and likeness. And Eleleth, perfection, peace, and Sophia, or wisdom in English. I left it in Greek there because she becomes important later, as I'm sure you know. These lights, the four great lights, each are at once, they are beings, they are periods of time, they are spatial dimensions, they are actually kind of like heavens in and of themselves. They contain souls, or they will contain souls as souls return to the fullness. Harmazel is specifically for Adam's soul. It's just He has his own heaven. He's a bit of a loner. He wants to have some time to himself. Seth, his son, also gets his own. They didn't get along very well. Thanksgiving was real awkward. You don't have Thanksgiving up here.
It's early.
Yeah, it's earlier. That's true. It doesn't count. It's fake Thanksgiving. No, I'm kidding.
Kidding, not kidding.
Yeah. Tebethes' heaven contained the seed of Seth, the Gnostics, the enlightened, the elect, as it were. Eleleth, here's an interesting point, contain the repentant souls, which are essentially regular Christians or Jews or people who were good in their life. They felt, they were, they were doing good things. The Sethians didn't look down on these people. They were like, yeah, we're special and we're great. You're cool, but we're great. But you're cool. That kind of thing. So this becomes what I refer to as Sethian qualified universalism trademark. So nobody used that. This is perfect and complete and full, and no one will ever mess with it, and it's delightful.
Okay, presentation's over.
Good, everybody. Uh-oh, trouble brewing. Here we have Sophia. Sophia's bored. Sophia thinks, I'm pretty smart. I'm wisdom. Right? I have an idea. Let's create something on our own, but I'm not going to ask for permission. This is where the trouble starts. She doesn't ask for permission. This is the entire mistake of the creation of the universe, is just this failure to follow proper divine order. Right? And that's it. It's not...
Bureaucracy?
It's bureaucracy. But it's a bureaucracy of balance, of reflection. Throughout all of the emanations in the pleroma, all that ever happens is the divine reflecting upon itself one layer at a time. This is not a reflection of the divine. This is a reflection of a reflection. This is a copy of a copy because it does not ask for permission. Yaldabaoth, then, also known as Saklas and Samael, gets emanated. It causes a kind of a tear in the pleroma. It's not exactly described like this in the text. In fact, this is a bit confusing. But the way that I understand it, the pleroma, which is full, a void is created, which is part of the pleroma, but apart from it. Again, we're talking about wishy-washy terms here. Scroll down a bit in my notes. This creates the water, right? This is the water of creation in Genesis that separated the water from the land. If you've read this text, or if you haven't read this text, this starts the part where this is a parody of Genesis, of the creation story of Genesis. Sophia, having this thought of Yaldabaoth, realizing she done screwed up. So she wants to hide her mistake from the invisible Father and from the rest of the pleroma. So she hides him in a cloud behind a throne, which is how the text is said. Now, again, thrones being a term of art in Jewish mysticism, that a throne being an angel of a certain rank in this sense. I don't know what it means. It could be just a direct reflection of that there are suddenly angels in the story that we weren't talking about before, that were more uncreated, but I don't think so. I think it's kind of like just a metaphor for being hidden, I think. Anyway, so Yaldabaoth is hidden. And thus begins, like I say, the creation of the cosmos, the physical reality that we exist in. But it's several steps away. She hides Yaldabaoth off in this void, in the waters. Yaldabaoth is sitting there and realizes that things aren't quite right. He's hiding, he's lonely, and he's sad. And he's angry about it. So he decides to start emanating his own folks to hang out with him. There are 360 minions that are referred to in the long version 360 that are emanated or created, I guess, from Yaldabaoth, from this soul material that exists in the void. Now, for the Gnostics, there was a tripartite division of spirit, soul, and matter. There's some flexibility and wiggle room depending on which group you're talking about. So in this case, we're talking about the pleroma being pure spirit. This void that exists now is pure soul, and it is not, there's no matter at this point in creation. He creates the 12 authorities, which are perhaps also androgynous, which would make sense to reflect what Yaldabaoth saw in the waters above, like he saw reflected in the waters above the perfection of the pleroma and wanted to create one of his own. So he creates these 12, which could be very well syncretized to the zodiac signs, which, again, talking about anti-astrology, this is why, right? That all of the planets and the zodiac signs that would have been so familiar to the Greeks and the Jews, the people of the Alexandria where this was being developed, turns it on its head. That's what the Gnostics do, right? We take existing worldviews and we turn them on their head. I don't know a whole lot about these individual beings. They were pretty much just named. So we're going around. That could be Hermes.
Adonai.
Yeah, Adonai, Sabaoth. Probably Cain. Yeah. Abraxas, probably. Yobel, again, named twice for fun. Harmupiel. I just like this. I just like to say that one. Harmupiel. I just like to say it. And probably Adonai again. Belias, of course, a figure from the Bible. And there we go. So now we have that. The next set of things that get emanated, Sabataios, these are more closely linked to the planets. Sabataios, Astaphios, Adonai, Eloios, Sabaoth, Iao, and there we have it. So we're again thinking of it as layers of an onion, as the ancient cosmological model would have. The planets exist radiating outward from the world. All right. Barbelo is looking in on all of this, and she is unhappy at what happened. Poor Barbelo. She's like, "What did you do?" So she puts this ninth heaven that is kind of this middle ground between the pleroma and the cosmos. She puts Sophia in there in a timeout. So Sophia's sitting there in a timeout to think about what she's done. Let me scroll down here.
Is she still there?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Can I ask a really stupid question?
Yeah, please. Makes me feel smart.
Is there time right now in this? Well, if she gets a time out, is there time?
These things are described in sequence.
Yeah, okay, that's good enough.
Yeah. But who knows? I mean, the process of emanation, of course, you can look at, like the theory of the Big Bang we see, and, time starts to exist as the universe expands. I don't think that these ancient peoples had like some divine revelation of how the physical universe was formed. Maybe they did. I don't know. But I find the emanations process to be interesting in that it mirrors
agreed.
what we understand about the creation of the physical universe, the emergence of the physical universe.
I think if you have planets rotating through houses, you probably have time, because that's how the ancients meant it.
That sounds right.
Right, but they're not necessarily rotating here.
Yeah.
These are pretty much just demons. Right?
Yeah.
So maybe the point where they start moving through is the start.
And remember, there's no matter here either.
Right.
There's no matter happening. I just want to pull out some quotes here from the book. And when he saw the creation, he, the demiurge, saw the creation which surrounded him, and the multitude of angels. The term angels is used for these beings that the demiurge creates here, which leads to a lot of confusion. They don't call them archons, they don't call them demons, but like later, or parallel Gnostic groups do use those terms, so I use them because they seem to be what we in the English-speaking world have kind of gravitated to already. Anyway, but they're called angels in this text. He said to them, I am a jealous God, and no other God exists beside me, again from Genesis. But his proclamation indicated to the angels who dwell with him that another God does exist, for if there were not another who exists, of whom would he be jealous? Sick burn. So, at this point, Sophia repents and weeps and receives the spirit that she lost to Barbaro in her creation. That a point that I kind of glossed over. Important to the story, though. When Sophia emanated Barbaro from herself without permission, she gave up her spirit to him, her piece of divinity.
Into
Yaldabaoth, yeah. So Barbaro replaces her spirit and puts her in a timeout. Okay. Next we see, after Barbaro has emanated all of this stuff, he then says, we really ought to have something to worship us. That would be cool. So out of the soul material, they begin to create a being after a pattern of Barbaro that they see in the water, specifically Barbaro in this case. When Barbaro comes down to give Sophia the timeout, he sees Barbaro in the reflection on the waters, and he says, I'm going to make one. So, of the soul material, and in a kind of mirroring of the creation that he just did, he creates different soul bodies. Now, I think of them kind of as onion layers from, like, in this case, they're going to go from the outside to the inside. And this, I believe, reflects what an ancient medical understanding of the human body would have been. Hair, sinew, skin, bone, blood, marrow, flesh. Like, they may not necessarily be in that order now that I'm looking at it. I thought they probably were. But that is the order that they are created in. And again, we're talking about the souls of these things, not the physical things, the souls of these parts. The spirit, so let me get back to it. They create this being, and it's just lying there like a dead fish. It doesn't do anything, and it has no movement, it has no life. This is an important theological point, that soul alone is another dead material, for lack of a better word. That soul alone cannot create life. This spirit that Yaldabaoth has, that he also has shared with his emanated beings, his created beings, did not go into the creation of this soul. They molded this soul from the clay that existed, the clay of the soul material that was there, that was left over in the tear. So Sophia, through Barbaro asked Sophia asked Barbaro for help, and Barbaro whispers in Yaldabaoth's ear, says, listen, if you want your dude to move, just blow into his nostrils, again in reflection of Genesis. Just blow into his nostrils.
So Barbaro said that?
Yes, in this text, yeah. Barbaro in the form of, now Barbaro takes a bunch of different forms, and I can't really keep straight. She appears as Enoia and Epinoia at various points in this part of the story. Enoia being thought and Epinoia being with thought, upon thought. So these are aspects of Barbaro, I guess you would say. It's very confusing. But it's Barbaro, this figure who does that. So Yaldabaoth is tricked into breathing his spirit into Adam at this point. And again, probably androgynous, as we saw in the previous presentation. As we will expand on this further. So we have the soul being with a spirit, and it is not worshiping Yaldabaoth like it should. It feels a little bit haughty. It's like, but I got the spirit inside me. I'm better than you. You don't have a spirit anymore. You gave it to me. I belong up there. And so the soul is then imprisoned in yet another layer of matter now. This is the prison of the flesh, which is a great line. he just, they're doing this in order to keep him down. They're trying to keep him from realizing his true place in the celestial hierarchy, in the proper divine order that we talked about before.
Question.
Yes.
So, the heaven of Adam was created before Adam.
Yes. Well, yes. Well, or actually, no, not necessarily. I was jumping around in the text a little bit there. The soul is where the soul goes to after it's died. So it wasn't
It
created.
was unassigned.
I guess it was unassigned. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. So, the spirit is pulled from Adam's side. The spirit, now not the rib, but the spirit is pulled from Adam's side and placed into this other female form, which is Eve. And so now Adam does not have this spirit or has a reduced spirit. Eve exists now. Let me back up a little and okay. Yep. All right. So Barbello sends the epinoia of the light, who is named Zoe on Earth. Like there's or in the cosmos is named Zoe, life. To become hidden inside Adam. That spirit gets hidden inside Adam. And I like these lines, so I'm going to read them. It is she who labors for the whole of creation by toiling with him, by setting him right in his own perfect temple, and by teaching him about the descent of his deficiency, and is instructing him about his ascent. So this we get this female figure whose job it is to be the savior of humanity. At this point, this is Barbello in the form of epinoia, lands in his tree in the garden in the form of an eagle to try to, just, hey, listen, wake up. You gotta, you're better than all of this. So, Adam then comes to recognize his spirit in the woman, like the spirit recognizes the spirit in the woman. And they decide to hide from the demiurge in the garden. Again, this text comes from Genesis. This is bone from my bone and flesh of my flesh. And because, not from Genesis, this is from Paul. I think, right? Because of this, man will leave his father and his mother and he will cling to his wife. And from the two they will become a single flesh. For the mother's partner will be sent forth and she will be set right. Epinoia is in the tree is the snake in this case. She instructs Eve to eat of the apple. Although there's no specific apple in this text, it just teaches them about the tree of knowledge of good and evil and how to eat it. So this is where it becomes a bit troubling. Because they now contain the spirit that Yaldabaoth does not, and they know of the knowledge of good and evil, he's upset about that and he's trying to further keep them down. He creates two beings. Before he does this, he actually rapes Eve, and Dr. Celine Lilly will be here later in the week, and she does a great presentation. She was on a show a couple weeks ago about how the rape of Eve in these texts is a reflection of rape culture in ancient Rome, and how this is a direct criticism of it, and fascinating stuff. Anyway, rapes Eve, and then Eve bears two sons, Adam and Eve. Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel are also syncretized in this text with Yahweh and Elohim. So this is Cain and Abel / Yahweh and Elohim. Yahweh has a bear's face. It is syncretized with Cain, and it is unrighteousness, and rules the water and the earth. Again, you see the four elements on this chain here, the chain of the elements. So Yaldabaoth, Yahweh rules the water and the earth. Elohim is a cat face, and is syncretized with Abel, and is righteousness, and rules fire and spirit or air, pneuma. These are the two principalities that rule over the tomb of the flesh. They call the flesh tomb. I love that.
Soma, Sam.
It's a pun.
Yeah, it's a Greek pun.
Is it?
Yeah.
Someone's
They love puns, those
I
crazy
know.
Greeks. All right. So, through this process of rape and oppression, it says marital intercourse and desire were created by Yaldabaoth in order to perpetuate this counterfeit spirit that he implanted in them to try to. The counterfeit spirit is a whole other thing. To fool humanity into misunderstanding their place in the divine.
So are you saying that it's like a cover-up model for the spirit?
Yeah, essentially. All right. So, and this is everything.
So simple so far, right?
Just it's not simple at all.
Now we,
Well,
get, to
compare-
the, now we get to the complex stuff.
Compared to the text, this is...
Well, that's
yeah.
true. Okay. The next thing that happens, which I don't really have a diagram for, is that the true spirits of Adam and Eve recognize each other, and through a kind of like a proper sexual encounter between the two of them, they beget Seth, who, for the Sethians, obviously named after Seth, is their kind of important progenitor, savior figure. Seth is kind of a Christ figure. Seth is often in the later Sethian stuff. Seth and Christ are kind of the same.
And Father, you mentioned that when Adam and Eve recognize each other,
Yes.
then Seth is born. Of course,
Yes.
the biblical term for having sex is to know.
To know, exactly, absolutely. So the Gnostics get accused a lot of like being the world-hating dualists who, well, if you hate the world so much, why don't you kill yourself? Or why are you bringing children into this awful world? And the answer is through a recognition of the divine within each other, we can avoid these mistakes. All right. I believe that's the last slide, yeah. All right. So then what ends up happening is there is this Q&A with Jesus that happens at this point in the text, basically. John's like, hey, well, I got you. Let me pick your brain. So the first several questions deal with the Sethian qualified universalism, and it seems that the soul can either get a spirit of life or a counterfeit spirit or a combination of the two when it is created. So like when a soul is incarnated on earth in the form of a child, it's like these two spirits kind of fight it out, the counterfeit spirit and the true spirit. There is I think there's various understandings of how this works in the various schools of Gnosticism. Some might say that there's a kind of predestination that occurs, that you get the good spirit, you get the bad spirit, there's nothing you can do about it. I don't think that is the way that most people would understand this today. Reincarnation is also implied at this point in the text, that if you don't do a great job this time, you get another shot, don't worry about it. And those who blaspheme against the Holy Spirit will be eternally punished. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. So that's it. Cannot blaspheme against the Holy Spirit. What does that mean? They do not say. So be eternally nervous that you're doing it. All right, fate. So here's something from the Berlin Codex specifically. They begot fate, and they bound the gods of heaven and angels and demons and human beings with measures and seasons and times, in order to keep them all in its fetter, for it was the Lord over them all. These principalities, Yahweh and Elohim, are the rulers of fate. That their job is to make sure that we follow their plan, right? That we're not questioning our status, that we're never looking upward at anything higher, that by even thinking about these things, their job is to throw obstacles in our way. And then something from the excerpt from Theodotus. Until baptism, they say that fate is real, but after it, the astrologers are no longer right. For it is not the washing that is liberating, but it is the knowledge of who we were, of what we have become, of where we were, of where we have been placed, of whither we hasten, from what we are redeemed, and what is birth and rebirth. Sounds familiar to us. Specifically, so we use the part, what makes us free is the gnosis of who we were. We start with that part. The really cool part is before that. I think we leave it out. Until baptism, they say fate is real. But after it, the astrologers are no longer right. But it is not only the washing that is liberated, the baptism, the water, but the knowledge of yada, yada, yada. Manly P. Hall says in The Secret Teaching of All Ages, the Hermetists taught that a strong and wise man ruled his stars, but a negative, weak person was ruled by them. Little nod to perennials in here. After this point, Noah survives the flood. Yaldabaoth is still angry about all of this, these spirits running around, so he decides to destroy the earth. The counterfeit spirit, Sophia, Epinoia, returns rather to warn Noah, and they get on the boat and do all that stuff. The rulers take human form to mate with women to sow the counterfeit spirit. This is where the counterfeit spirit gets explained. So this is reflected in Genesis, where the Watchers, are begotten by the sons of God, and the daughters of men get it on and create either giants or weird rock monsters. If you're Darren Aronofsky, you seen it?
Oh yeah.
Okay. This counterfeit spirit creates 4 things specifically. Right? The desire for wealth, the desire for beauty, the desire for food, and lust. These are the 4 practices, the 4 negative things that the Sethian communities would have been trying to avoid. This is their asceticism, I believe. That there was a series of practices and a series of proscribed actions that related to those 4 things specifically. So anyway, I'm thinking that these. As a community, they would have practiced these, ritual purity kind of rules. They would have been doing an ascent practice that started from the center and ascended out to the end, and we'll talk about that. How am I doing on that? Okay, good. You see things like this in Judaism, in the Merkaba mysticism. Platonism talks about ascent. The Corpus Hermeticum mentions it a lot. The night journey of the Prophet Muhammad from the Quran is very similar to an ascent. Ezekiel going up to heaven. In Egypt, which is not far from, which is where this stuff is being developed, there's a tradition of the Book of the Dead, or the Book of Going Forth by Day, where the soul has to pass through a series of obstacles on the way to its final rest. In Tibet, the Bardo practice, you probably know a bit about that. Yes?
I was just going to say, and perhaps Dr. Gooden might know more about it than I do, but isn't there something in Orthodoxy about the toll houses?
I'm getting to it. Don't ruin my presentation.
No, I'm sorry.
Yes. In Tibetan Buddhist practice, when a person dies, the cleric of whatever rank, I don't know what, comes in and reads to the deceased and says, okay, here's what you're going to encounter next. This really scary demon, it's not really that scary, you just do this and you're going to be fine. And so the soul progresses through. The problem that this is trying to address, from top to bottom, is the problem of evil, the theodicy question. Why do bad things happen to good people? Nobody has a good answer for that. We have a pretty good answer for that, I think, right? It's like, and the Platonists also have a pretty good example, because we stole it from them. The difference between the Platonic hierarchy and the Platonic answer to why there's evil and the Gnostic one is, in the Gnostic one there's a hard break. In the Platonic one it's more of a sliding scale. This hard break between the light gray and the black circles here, like, this is evil. This defines evil. And anything that is pushing us further down into this black circle is evil. And anything that is moving us further up towards the gray circle is good in this particular morality. Because of this inversion of the proper divine order, because we are at a lower station than we should be, as we should be up there in the gray area, but we're not, we're down here in the black. Ignorance, sexism, violence, hate, all of these things are created by the cosmos. They're part of the cosmos and cannot be avoided. The other problem that this tries to address is there are some logical inconsistencies in the Genesis story. This tries to correct some of those. This tries to address some of the things that Plato never talked about. Revealed knowledge is the answer to how this happens. This through revealed texts like this one, apocalypses, through personal contact with divine authorities. This is the gnosis that we're looking for. This understanding of the reality of the world. One second. Everybody in this community and in the Gnostic world in general talks about the importance of gnosis, and it is vitally important, but it is step one. Gnosis is step one. We need to figure out how to get from gnosis all the way back up. Gnosis doesn't get you there. Gnosis shows you that there is a there. Okay? Yes.
I was going to say, and that's why you don't blaspheme against the Holy Spirit,
Well,
which is common to both,
yes.
Orthodox, small O Orthodox, and Gnostic traditions. Which, as Monsignor Bray, who is in here, noted in a homily a couple of weeks ago, that you can deny Christ and still come back and be okay, but you can't blaspheme against the Holy Spirit. Well, why is that? And my take on that, of course, is because it deals with revelation and the continued presence of the divine.
If you piss
in the
off the Holy
universe.
Spirit, she's going to stop talking to you.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Anyway, so revealed knowledge, step one. Gnosis is step one. Study, what we're doing here, is an important part, not the only part, but an important part. It tends to be what a lot of us get caught up in because it's interesting. The extirpation of the passions, and those four particular passions that they were talking about. Purification from evil through ritual. The 5 seals is a Sethian ritual that gets talked about, and we don't know exactly what it was, but it was some sort of baptismal ritual in some kind. We think that the healing ritual would have occurred, physical bodily healing, and also mental illness would have been healed through this text using those names that were laid out in the different parts of the body. I didn't do it specifically here, but each part of the body in the long version of the Secret Book of John has an angel associated with it, which is actually one of these demons. And I think the important and the most important missing part is that there was some sort of visionary ascent ritual, which, again, the whole point of this whole stupid thing is they laid this out for people in this text. They laid out this diagram, as it were, so that we would know that the way out is the way in. Like, we know how we got here. Now we know how to get out. And there was probably some kind of elaborate initiatory mystery tradition ritual that they would have undergone that is totally lost to us at this point, and it's so sad. But if you look at something we have more access to is like the Mithraic cult, which had a very similar cosmology and specifically talked about the soul entering through a specific kind of zodiacal pathway, and that there is an ascent process to go back. So, the Gnostic Ascent working project that we have been doing as individuals in this community have been working on for a number of years now, come to be known as the Epinoia Fan Club. We've been collecting notes and doing research, and with the intent of perhaps developing and or recovering some sort of ascent practice for modern Gnostics, which will probably look absolutely nothing like what they did, and it may never come to pass, but we have hope. So I encourage anybody who is interested in this material, please read this book and others. Clark later will be talking about the Gospel of Mary, which has a lot of this stuff in it as well. And a lot of the Gnostic texts contain allusions to this kind of ascent stuff. In the Pistis Sophia, Jesus ascends through the spheres to the wheel of the zodiac and breaks it. Like, he physically breaks the wheel of the zodiac. And he's like, nope, we don't need that anymore. So there's a lot of these kind of processes. At any rate, we do have a website, GnosticAscent.com, which is currently password protected, and you need an account to get in, because we decided it would be fun to have a secret club, basically. So if you're interested, you can email me and I can attempt to get you a login, although it's been years since I've had to do it and I don't remember how. Yes, so that's all I got. Perhaps a little disappointing there at the end. And here's what we're going to do. I don't know. Any further
You're all
questions?
baptized. People stop reading your star signs in the newspaper.
Well, I mean, kind of, right?
My wife has like 4 different horoscope apps on her phone, and when
picks
one
the
doesn't
one-
tell her what she likes, she's like, "Yeah, screw that." On to the next one, and it's like, "See, I knew it. You're cheating on me. You're spending all my money." No.
There we go. See astrology.
Toll houses.
Oh, sorry, toll houses. I
Toll
totally-
houses.
I totally go
first.
Sure,
I
yes.
love their cookies.
There is a tradition amongst the Eastern Orthodox that the soul after death will physically ascend through the air, like our air, and that it will be accompanied by angels. And at certain points in the air, and there are people with the spiritual side who have seen this happen. That
That wasn't a comment.
who knows? At certain points along the soul's journey to heaven, there are tolls, like what you think of when you go along the highway and you're stopped, and there's a demon at the toll, and it will try to accuse you of various sins, and if you've not atoned for those sins, it is allowed to drag your soul down to hell. So you meet these obstacles along the way, very similar to the Tibetan Bardo and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where
See, death and taxes really are
death and taxes are
inescapable.
the same thing.
Yeah.
Is that more or less accurate?
Yes, there's like I really want to add it. This idea emerged, I believe, in the 14th or 15th century, and it emerged in dialogue with the Catholic West. And Catholics have purgatory, what you Orthodox have, and so some guy on his own invented this doctrine of, well, we don't have purgatory, we have something that does the same thing. Though apparently that speaks to a psychological need of some kind because it caught on.
Yeah.
It's not endorsed by the church.
Right.
Much of the church considers it heretical and just kind of a side point. There's no salvation after death is one of the things, but it persists. And Orthodox love to fight, and that's one of the things they fight about.
Yeah, I think it's delightful. Just the image of it is so great.
Exact change, please.
Yeah.
I was going to say that, you know, if
Yeah,
somehow
easy pass.
I was going to say somehow with no salvation after death, somehow if I screw it up, I'm hoping some future Mormons at some point in time fix the problem for me. The guy who, correct me if I'm wrong, the guy who wrote the thing on the toll houses in the modern era is Seraphim Rose, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the 80s,
Yeah.
There's a collection of essays in a book called Practicing Gnosis.
Yes, I have.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's one essay, I think Erin Evans, or I can't remember exactly the name, where she talks about the use of talisman, for instance,
Yes.
and some of the ritual.
Yes.
They might not have been qualified as what today people say Satan and all that.
Yeah.
But you know, it's interesting some of the possibilities there. I think it has to do a lot with baptism. And
Yes,
some
yes,
of the
yes.
rituals.
That you're right. That, like there are implied, not necessarily in this text, but in other texts, that you would get a sigil that you would show. It's like this is your pass card, you know? And you would get different sigils for the different obstacles. Yeah, super interesting.
But it's a very nice talk. Thank you very much. Some aspect it reminded me a bit of some early Chinese religions. You know, the formation of religious Taoism. You know, in the 2nd century, and then there was some aspect. 2 things that you talked about. The first thing had to do about the gods or the demons inhabiting the body, for instance. You know, that's one thing, and the other one has to do with the various souls that are put together to create this being. Well, for the last point, you know that in Taoism, for instance, you know, humans are not made out of one soul, but of 10 of them, right? And 3 of them are yang, and 7 of them are yin. And the 7 yin correspond to the 7 emotions, and 3 yang of them, then they end up corresponding to ancestral spirit, the qi, and then I think the essence, the jin. And then on the whole process of inner alchemy or alchemy in this school would be that, well, when someone that does not cultivate himself or herself, when that person dies and all these fragment and goes You know, and depending which one was more animated than the others, it will survive for a while, but eventually it will dissipate. And then the trick about inner alchemy is to take all these 10 and then to mingle them together, and then you create what they call the homunculus, you know.
Yes, yes.
And which after that you use that homunculus, and then you can, you know, like travel in the universe.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
body. That's one thing.
That's very interesting.
And then the thing about these demons or archangel and all that is that one of the first practice that they would use a lot of sigils, you know, they call talismans. And then, but one of the things was that the spirits inhabiting the outer universe are also inhabiting the inner universe, right? And then so members of that church, they were called the celestial masters. And then they, part of the initiation, they were given what they call spirit generals, or they were actually spirits like Archangel Michael or something like that, that would be given to that infant or that small child, for instance. Then eventually, as the child grows, then more spirit general will be given until they have a total of about 75 of them. And then so, and this is a very old tradition that is even used today in contemporary China by Taoist priests. So when they go, for instance, and do rituals, one of the main things that they do is all these spirits that are living inside their body, they are externalized. And then with them, they assisted, you know, to perform the rituals and all that. So that's why I thought it was interesting, you know. You didn't talk about it, unfortunately. I would have loved to, of course, but I'm sure all of us would have loved you to talk about various aspects.
Yeah. Oh, next time. Yeah. My brain's going in a million different places now.
Yeah, those are really exciting parallels.
Yes.
This is very interesting to see. I mean, if we're speaking theologically as Gnostics, we would say there's all these parallels because it's true, right? However, if you're looking at it as a scholar, there's interesting psychological needs and understandings of the world that seem to be very human being met.
Right.
Yeah.
And the things that I didn't necessarily focus on, that if I were talking to a different audience or giving the presentation slightly differently, like these beings, you saw all their names in the pleroma, are reflections of cognitive processes, a lot of them.
Yes.
And I talk about this all the time.
I was going to say, Dr. Pleja, a couple of years ago at Conclave in his Poetics of the Gnostic Myth, talked about it as talked about the myth as a psychological response to,
Yes.
I think, to handle the universe as it
Yeah,
were.
yeah, absolutely.
It's all
So
in
these
your
things,
head. Your head is just extremely large.
Yeah. And the other thing is, you know, this ritual, this ascent ritual would have been pre-mortem in order to prepare oneself for the bodily death. And I realize I've left that out of the presentation 3 times now. So,
Well, now it's in.
Not anymore.
Yeah. Speculation on the 5 seals. You got it?
I think there were a series of baptismal rituals where they were given various initiatory teachings.
Yeah. Maybe some unction, maybe.
Some unction. I think they're building the spiritual vehicle, the body of light, in whatever form that might have taken, which is kind of why I'm so interested in the Point Show work that has been developed recently. As a way of, again, it's the Point Show in the Voodoo system is actually you're binding a spirit. You know, it's not just an energy spirit.
Well, it's got the same 360 spirits. There's 360 spirits. Like I think you mentioned 360.
The servitors of.
Well, sure. There's 360
Yeah.
bad guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's fewer than that of the parts of the body.
Yeah.
95, 97?
I don't know. I've never counted. Well, there's a significant lacuna in that part of the text.
Yeah, my eyes glaze over when I read it, but it's a lot.
I was going to say, in relation to the seals, I mean, as we know from explorations in previous conclaves, unction, depending on who's doing it in the Christian tradition, involves anointing the 5 senses.
Yes.
As a part of the.
And I think this would have been 5 separate events. Is my opinion, but maybe not. Yes, Joe.
You seem. Alright, it's going to seem like a loaded question, sorry, but like everything that you've discussed is a progression. Like there's an emanation, and something else, and that made something else, and then, but you seem pretty confident that the goal of the Sethians was to kind of go backwards, to kind of like undo and unravel what happened. But from Christian point of view, like the salvation of the world came from yet another progression, like Mary, a woman of matter, gave birth to the divine man, and so there was another growth and another, is that your own personal perspective that it was an unraveling, or is there something to actually say that that is actually the progression that they were talking about, instead of actually growing more and creating a more instead of adding to the story, and that our spiritual purpose would be to bring divinity into this material world, as opposed to unraveling this spirituality ourselves from the physical.
Well, it's not bringing divinity into the world. Divinity is in the world. Divinity is already in the world. It's covered. It's obscured. And by gnosis of the fact that it exists and that it is obscured, and then by a process of ritual purity, again, those four specific passions that they prescribed against, would uncover the way, would open a channel between this spirit and the divine spirit, which are in fact the same spirit, right? And they participate in each other. It's an uncovering more of an unraveling, I think. Does that answer your question?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, I was just wondering, I guess it's more a matter of is there hope for the material world in this perspective?
Oh, yeah, okay. So yeah, like a Simpson, a rolling up of the.
I was going to say that some of this reminds me of the Lurianic.
Sure, yeah. The text does say something about that. I don't remember exactly what. I think that when I talk to occultists, a lot of them will talk about, in Kabbalah terms, that there is going to be at some point a critical mass of enlightenment, where enough people become enlightened that the creation is going to fold itself back up along
the Martinist reintegration, essentially.
Reintegration.
Also. Yeah.
I don't know what the Sethians would have had to say specifically about that, but I think that most of the material world is disposable after a certain point, but I don't think that they're saying that there is a specific end. I don't think they reference a specific end to all of it.
I don't think the Sethians are particularly interested in the material world. It's a throwaway line.
Right.
There's this long narrative about the perverted creation of the human soul.
Yes.
And then right at the end it's and then they put them in the matter to distract.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. And then they're going to talk about something else. The problem's not the material world. The problem is that intensely complex, knotted up human soul that's now built in the material world.
But I was going to say, but in terms of, because of that qualified Sethian universalism, and the implied reincarnation, and I think Dr. Pleasure, who talked about Apocryphon of John as well, said that it's universalist, that eventually everything will. I mean, you're going to run out of you're going to run out of people to save. Everything will.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate reading of the text, yeah.
Unless there's some ultimate unrepentant soul
who blasphemed against the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Well, now you've gone and screwed us all.
Oh God. Part 2.
Anyway, the answer is I don't know.
There was this tradition also that some humans are not even humans, but they are reincarnations of some sort of elemental force.
Yeah, interplanetary demon.
Good times.
Just materialistic type of spirits or something.
Sorry. This is more for the people at home on YouTube because I can't remember the reference, but in Dr. Plesha's talk, which you can see on our YouTube channel, kind of building on what Father Joey was asking, just about the material world and also sort of kind of building on what he was asking. When we look at this, it all looks like it was a big mistake, right? Right. Dr. Plesha does mention in his lecture, and I can't remember the reference, there's 2 lines, and of course this is a very long, complicated text, but there's 2 lines that seem to indicate that this is part of an important process for the divine. Something about Sophia seeding the souls, but I can't remember the reference. So everybody at home, please watch Dr. Plesha's excellent thing, and you can build on some of these topics that are being talked about.
I think there's distinct pictures presented in the long version and the short version. The long version does that thing that's characteristic of later versions of the text, where something's brief and ambiguous in the short version,
Yes.
and the long version goes, and what that means is blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
So the long version presents it as an error. The short version is pretty ambivalent about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth considering that we're talking about God's wisdom, the actions of God's wisdom at this point. It's the unfolding of the divine mind, and God's wisdom takes this particular step. So it seems like a catastrophe from our point of view.
Yes.
But it's worth considering.
It's like I talked about.
Just the last little piece for me. The whole story up until the point of Sophia's action is the whole of the system unfolding this perfect harmonious balance, right?
Yeah.
And these pairs of opposites appear all over the place. So you reach this point where you've unfolded all the possible harmonious pairs of opposites, right? So then what balances the harmonious pairs of opposites? Disharmony.
Yes.
And at precisely that point, God's wisdom begins to create disharmony perhaps as a balance for harmony.
Yeah. All right. Because you've got pairs.
Yeah.
Very
I'm not as awesome as you think I am.
Yeah, like a meta androgyne kind of figure. Yeah. It's like I say all the time when I get into internet arguments with people. Which
Block.
the world-hating dualist part of Gnosticism is essential to the Gnostic worldview until it isn't.
Yeah.
It's a very useful tool for introducing people to these concepts. There is a certain point where it falls away.
It's quite motivating at a certain stage in spiritual journey.
Yeah, very motivating. When I, was an angsty teenager, it would have, really kind of fired on all cylinders for me.
For the longer version, perhaps being a little bit more negative or more world-hating, or this is a big mistake, there is a theory that the longer version is a Manichaean redaction.
Yeah.
And the Manichaeans, of course, are particularly dualist, particularly not big on the world.
And particularly Persian, which gets you to Zoroastrian material, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So it's very interesting theory. One last thing, I just like the sound of my voice that I'll add, going back to the 5 seals, because we're talking about, trying to figure out what it was, but in Pissa Sophia, there's references to on-sealing, where the counterfeit spirit is being removed by an on-sealing. So the 5 seals might be the removal of the counterfeit spirit. Instead of, because I think a lot of people think of it as something being sealed in, right? You're sealing in some good stuff, but instead it's opening up the seals and maybe also some Revelation references.
Sure.
As I say, maybe you need an e-meter.
Yes. We have to edit out all the Scientology references.
Well, I was going to say, when you were talking about Submariner deacons, I'm like, this church is only one step away from having a Sea Org anyway. So.
It's a canoe.
Canoe. Shuttle me around, acolyte.
We're gonna get sued now by Scientology.
Yeah, by Scientology.
Well, that's a great place to end, don't you think?
That was fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.